Thank you again for joining us. If you just joined us, we are honored to have you here for our third webinar. It's an honor to have you here. So as I mentioned a few minutes ago, there's about 285 people who signed up to join this call. And I think that that's important because I think there's people who have always had lots of questions. And usually if you want to find a lot of the information on USMLEs, it's almost like you have to know someone or you have to dig around on the internet. But fortunately, through KEDU, we're now able to create a space so people can tell us what topics they're curious about, and we can provide people who can answer those questions. And we're honored to have Dr. Stephen Kimani with us today, who is a board-certified internal medicine physician at UNC and currently a hematology-oncology fellow at UNC. Also, he is a co-founder here at KEDU, so we know him pretty well. And then the other thing about Steve is that he's had the opportunity to work across different countries in Africa in research capacity and also in clinical capacity. So I imagine that in the future we'll reach out to you for even more insight on how to do that. But today we're focusing primarily on USMLEs. And Steve is going to kind of also walk us through his journey. So if you don't know Steve, you will get to know him really well today. So before we jump in, I want to just go through a couple of announcements. You guys might know, if you've been hanging out with KEDU for a while, you know that we have a mentorship program. So we're getting to the very end of allowing people to sign up for the 2020 mentorship cycle. So the deadline is going to be today or over the weekend. But we just want to make sure that we deliver a really effective mentorship program. And because of that, we have to have a stopping point for people to sign up. So we have a ton of great mentors who are ready to walk you through whatever you're dealing with or your process of if you're interested in research, clinical, epidemiological research, if you're interested in the business of medicine, there's mentors who are ready to walk you through their journey with those topics. And again, the topics are endless, so feel free to sign up. Our website is kedusa.org. Secondly, I want to also direct attention to our discussion forums. And this is important, especially today, because we are going to be taking your questions live. So if you have a question, I encourage you to go ahead and even start posting it now on the chat. The discussion forums is where we're going to post all of your questions to help conversations continue beyond the webinar. And that's important because maybe there's someone else's answer or question that can inform your knowledge, or kind of sometimes you don't realize you have a question and then someone else asks it and you're like, wow, that's a good question. So that's going to be where we're going to basically do a lot of the engagement that will start here and continue on our discussion forum. So if you haven't signed up yet, please go to kedusa.org and register and sign up. It's a very, very simple process. So we're looking forward to engaging with you more on there. So we'll be posting also the questions progressively. We also have a Twitter account, so we'll be doing some live tweeting as well. But our main engagement platform will be our discussion forums. And if you're on Twitter, our hashtag, not our hashtag, but our handle is KEDUSA, Kenyan Doctors USA. So if you're looking for us, that's how you can find us. And the hashtags I think that the hashtags are, let me look that up just to make sure I give you guys the right info. So the hashtags are Kenyan Doctors or USMLE Webinar. So you can find those two hashtags throughout our conversation today. So without much further ado, I'd like to again invite Dr. Stephen Kimani, who we're truly honored to have join us today for this conversation. Thank you for your time. We appreciate you. And before we get started, I also wanted to point your attention to there's an article that's has gone up or is going up on the KEDU website that will corroborate and support everything that Dr. Kimani is going to talk about today. And he'll also share a little bit about that as well. So welcome, Dr. Kimani.
Thanks, Yvonne. And good evening, those of us joining us from Kenya, and then good afternoon, people in the US. So I'm just going to switch and share my screen. The essence, this is not going to be an end end it all for everything USMLE and practicing in the US. It's barely scratching the surface. So it's just gonna be trying to highlight, especially for beginners, how, what this process looks like, what are the various moving pieces. We are planning to have a series of webinars focusing on transitioning to clinical practice in the US if you're Kenyan based, and if you're US based, on how to, get your ideal training opportunities here. And those will be scattered over the coming months. So stay tuned. So the structure of this talk, to begin with, I have no disclosures that are relevant to this presentation. So I'm going to go through a few acknowledgements for participants as well. I'm going to just spend a second or two to talk about my journey, because I think it's important to see and be relatable, in the sense that this is there are no unicorns here. Everyone has an equal chance and an equal opportunity. We'll talk about differences between Kenya and US post-medical training, and this will be kind of easier for some people, but I found it helpful to go through this because some of the questions I've gotten over the years, or some of the questions that are coming through our email at KEDU might have suggested that this might be worth refreshing. Then we'll review a traditional pathway to clinical practice in the US for a foreign trained physician. I did write an article about the details on ECFMG certification process, and that's available on our website. I would say that article has a lot of embedded resources that you can actually click on them and get to where you need to be. So for those of you who want to get as much as they can from this talk, it might be helpful to be looking through that article, because some of the information will be embedded there. So this slideshow is not going to be a duplicate of that. Things that I will not discuss in details are immigration issues or visa issues. I think that's a whole complex process that will be best addressed at a future session. I will not go into details of USMLE tests, reading and preparation and hacking that. I think that also is by itself worth of a session on its own, especially because there are step 1, step 2, and step 2CS. Then we'll not talk about residency interviews, but this is all part of the package that comes with a vision of sharing as much and connecting people to as much resources regarding this process. So stay tuned. Part 2 and part 3 will be coming. I'm hoping to spare at least 20 minutes, maybe more, at the end, because I know we have some very experienced people who've joined the audience who might be able to engage more and answer some of the questions. So I encourage the attendees to have their questions ready and share them with the host. And then some of our experts, hopefully they are free to until the end. So starting off with acknowledgement. So I just want to, KEDU is maybe a year or so. It's a new outfit. I'm excited to be part of it. I think we have great ideas and great vision, and we are looking for more people to participate in some of our programming. However, I want to shout out specifically to Dr. Nyakio for working with me and working with KEDU for the webinar logistics. Dr. Njeri, who's helping us with communications and live tweeting this event. And then Dr. Ngaria, who helped me with drafting and editing of my blog article that is currently posted on the website. It's really important to recognize that it takes a village. And I think I want to shout out to those in the audience who, we've been in one or the other. Specifically, there are people who went to medical school with, there are people who helped me with vaccine and mentorship through USMLE. And it's going to take the whole 9 yards to mention all of you by name, but I kind of took a quick glance at the attendees, and I want to acknowledge the presence of Chris Moniki, we are very excited. He finished his med school at the University of Nairobi. He's planning to start residency this summer at Duke, so looking forward to welcoming here. We have George, who we go back decades, Tito, Moses. So these three are cardiology fellows or cardiology attendees in various places in the United States. There might be a few other names that will pop up. I just encourage if I texted you directly to participate, maybe you can hang out until the end to help with the Q&A. And obviously, we want to thank the attendees because it takes foresight to be able to see this far ahead in your future and to think about some of these difficult questions about what pathways are good for you. So, and as well as taking the time on a Friday evening in Kenya to participate in a webinar. That's something that I probably would not have done 10 years ago. Quickly about my story, and the point of this slide is just to show that the pathways are pretty standard. So I was a medical student at the University of Nairobi between 2004 and 2010. It took me 6 years to get my med school degree, but that's because I took an extended 1 year intercalated BSc in anatomy. After med school, I did internship in Nyeri at a mission hospital and had a brief stint as a medical officer in Barra before coming to the US. So almost 8 years ago now, where I came to do my master's in global health. So that time, so between 2012 and 2014 was pretty formative for me as regarding transitioning to clinical practice in the US, because at that point, during my 2-year master's, that's when I was able to register for ECFMG, and that's my timeline there. So I did my registration, which is basically the very first thing you do. In February 2013, I took step 1 in May, so about 3 months later. Then I took CS, step 2 CS in October of the same year, and then CK in December. And so I received my ECFMG certificate in January 2014. So after my master's, I spent about 10 months or so in a research lab doing clinical research and started residency in 2015. So this was in internal medicine, which is a 3-year training program. After that, I started fellowship. So academic year for residencies and fellowship starts in July and end in June. So that's why there's a bit of overlap in the years. So I'm currently in my 2nd year of fellowship in hematology and oncology, still here in North Carolina. So this is familiar to most people, but it might not be very intuitive to others. I want to take the time to go through what I think of as the traditional pathways in both Kenya and in the US and highlight a few differences. So, in Kenya, we basically go through high school. Depending on your pathway to medical school, you might have wanted to go to medical school, or someone asked you to go to medical school, including JAB or the Joint Admissions Board. But anyway, you went to medical school and spent about 5 to 7 years. So I put the range because I suspect that in this audience, there are people like me who did the 5-year medical school, University of Nairobi curriculum. There are people who went to Moi who probably did the 6 years. And then for a variety of reasons, I think there might be some 7-year medical school people. And then you do your internship for 1 year. Best case scenario, I know sometimes that can be extended or get delayed. Then you go into a medical officer role. And I put a star there because I think of the medical officer role as not necessarily a destination career for most people, but for some people, it might be a destination career. And so the time that you spend as a medical officer varies quite extensively. Some people go and do specialty training, so either want to do internal medicine or surgery or pediatrics or gynecology and obstetrics, and that's usually in the form of MMed. at Moi or University of Nairobi or at Aga Khan. And that, depending on the specialty, could range from 4 to 6 years. I'm sure there are people, I'll be hard pressed to find people who've done it in 3 years or people who've done it in more than 10 years, but it's a range. After that, most people transition into specialty practice, either in academics or in private practice or other careers. A few people are able to explore subspecialty training, which means if, for example, if you did internal medicine and you want to be a cardiologist, to the best of my knowledge, that might have changed, but there might not be that many opportunities to formally train in cardiology in Kenya. I think Moi has started a cardiology fellowship, but the number of years of the structure of that subspecialty training is very variable. It ranges from formalized fellowships within Kenya to certificate courses in India or other places, and Masters of Science courses in the UK, Australia. So that tends to be a bit of a mixed bag. And across all these paths, will always jump off and do something else. And there's always new opportunities that come up. Some of the big ones that I know people have transitioned to are pharmaceutical industry, public health, policy, and entrepreneurship. But I'm sure there are many other pathways. Now, if you contrast that with the US has a pretty linear and kind of stochastic training pathway. So basically you do high school, then you do bachelor's degree. You have to do a 4-year bachelor's degree, which some people call pre-med, before you get into medical school, which is, in most cases, it's 4 years. I think there are a few programs like the NYU program that's now 3 years, and then some programs might tack on some research years, but it's typically 4 years. And then you go into specialty training, which is called residency. And that can be anywhere from 3 to 6 years, depending on the specialty. So for most medical specialties, they tend to be 3 to 4 years. For most surgical specialties, they tend to be 5, 6, or 7 years. And then some people go straight after residency and practice in whichever specialty they train, which is similar to Kenya. But it's not unusual, actually. A significant number of people go on to do subspecialty training, which compared to Kenya is quite formalized here in the sense that there are fellowship programs, which range from 1 to 4 years. And you could tack on several fellowships. There's no limit on how much subspecialty you want to get. But the difference across this pathway is that generally when you start residency, you are in sort of trainee employee position. So you are usually employed by the hospital or the health system. You're not making full salary for the specialty that you're training at, but you're given a stipend. So most people do not pay to do residency, and no one pays to do fellowship. You might be paid a reasonable stipend, which is decent for living costs. So there are no scholarships into residency, because this is one question I've gotten. For clinical graduate medical training in the US, you do not need to get a scholarship. But for other pathways like public health or health policy or MBAs, those ones you might need to you might be eligible for scholarships. That's the difference with the MEd, where most of the time you actually pay to attend a master's in medicine in Kenya, unless you're one of the few who are lucky to be sponsored by the government, which probably meant you spend quite a bit of time as a medical officer. And most people will not make a salary during their MEd. And so I highlight that specifically because in the long run, it might be worthwhile to weigh the pros and cons, especially if you're thinking about going through this pathway to clinical practice. So this slide is gonna be, I guess, the bulk of my talk. I think a picture is worth 1,000 words. So in the US, as long as you did not graduate from a US-based medical school, you're considered an international medical graduate. And so you will fall on the side of IMG. And this is independent of your citizenship status. Even if you're a US citizen and you trained at a medical school that's not based in the US, I guess, and maybe Canada, you'll be considered an IMG for the purposes of training and practice. So for most IMGs, it's actually, I think it might be easier. Let's go through this 6-minute video. I think that will give me a break from talking and let people kind of process the information, and then we'll go through this.
To participate in the main residency match, all applicants must meet specific requirements to be verified as eligible to enter residency. For international medical school students and graduates or IMGs, the NRMP partners with the Educational Commission for Foreign Medical Graduates, or ECFMG, to verify eligibility. Without this verification, IMG applicants can't participate in the match or the Match Week Supplemental Offer and Acceptance Program, or SOAP. Let's review the verification requirements and match process for an IMG. Meet Samir. Samir is an IMG who wants to complete graduate medical education in the United States and become a licensed physician. Like applicants who attend United States medical schools, Samir will apply for residency programs and register for the match. However, to participate in the match, the NRMP requires that IMGs meet all examination requirements for ECFMG certification by the rank order list deadline for the match. That means Samir must have achieved passing scores on Step 1, Step 2 clinical knowledge, and clinical skills of USMLE, or United States Medical Licensing Examination. After the match opens in September, the NRMP conducts weekly data exchanges with the ECFMG until the rank order list deadline. NRMP provides ECFMG with a list of IMGs who have registered for the match, and the ECFMG confirms whether those applicants have passed the exams. Once the ECFMG confirms the exam requirements have been met, the applicant is verified as eligible to participate in the match. The time required to complete these exams is different for each individual, so IMG applicants must plan ahead to meet them before the rank order list deadline. Samir also should research programs in which he is interested and review their requirements. Although IMGs who are not U.S. citizens can participate in the match if they meet the exam requirements, it's important to note that the NRMP is not involved in setting programs' application requirements and the visa types they will support. Individual programs decide if they will consider IMGs and which visa types they will support, if any. Procedures and deadlines for sponsoring visas vary widely, so Samir must research visa requirements for all the programs in which he is interested. When Samir has chosen the programs where he wants to apply, he must complete the program's application. Most residency programs participating in the main residency match receive applications through the Electronic Residency Application Service, or ERAS. ERAS is a separate organization and thus requires a separate registration by applicants. IMGs begin the application process by requesting an ERAS token from ECFMG. The token allows applicants to access the ERAS website where they can complete their residency applications. Some programs use their own application process or do not participate in the NRMP, so applicants must research and follow the appropriate application process. Remember, ERAS and NRMP are separate organizations and thus require separate registrations in order to use the services of each. Samir is now ready to register for the match. He will enter basic profile information into the NRMP's registration, ranking, and results, or R3 system, electronically sign the match participation agreement, and pay the match fees. Applicants who have participated in the match in previous years must register each year they intend to participate. The NRMP asks about citizenship status during registration. It is collected for research purposes only, and programs cannot see it in the NRMP system. Programs will receive the citizenship status for their applicants on the ERAS application. The match has a number of important deadlines, so Samir must pay close attention to the match calendar to be sure he registers in time and avoids the late registration fee. Once his applications are sent to programs, Samir is ready to interview. How and when programs review applications and contact applicants for interviews is up to the individual program. Interviews are generally conducted from October to January. With his interviews completed, Samir ranks the program from most preferred to least preferred by creating a rank order list in NRMP's system. At the same time, programs will rank their applicants. Both Samir and programs must certify their list by rank order list deadline for those lists to be used when the matching algorithm is processed. If Samir didn't receive any interviews, he will not rank any program, so he does not need to enter or certify a rank order list. If the ECFMG has verified that Samir has met the exam requirements, he can still participate in SCOPE. But remember, Samir must be verified by the ECFMG as having passed the required exams by the rank order list deadline. If Samir has not been verified, the NRMP will withdraw him from the match, and his rank order list will not be used when the matching algorithm is processed. Samir can log into the R3 system to check his eligibility after he has passed all his exams. Luckily, Samir has passed all his required exams, so he has been verified as eligible to participate in the match. After he certifies his rank order list, there's nothing to do but wait for the results. When match day arrives, Samir receives his results, and he matched. Not everyone matches, but for those who do, it's important to remember the match results are binding. In the main residency match, eligible applicants who don't match can participate in SOAP. More information on the SOAP process can be found on the NRMP website. The match can be a complicated process for IMGs because a number of different organizations play a part, so understanding the process is crucial. Learn more by visiting our partner organizations and by reviewing all the resources available on the NRMP website.
So that 6-minute video actually is able to condense what might turn out to be several months or a few years of processes for IMGs. And I'm sure there will be many questions about specifically each of those stages. I don't have additional complementing information, but I just wanted to capture that video in this pictogram here. And a few questions that I would respond to directly were, must you have finished med school in Kenya to be able to start or take the USMLE? And the answer is no. So you can start your ECFMG registration and take step one, take the the formative USMLE exams before you finish medical school. However, to be ECFMG certified, which means you have passed step one, step two, CK and CS, you must have graduated from an ECFMG eligible international school. And that certification is a prerequisite to successfully matching. So the process might be happening in parallel from when you register for ECFMG certification, when you take your USMLEs, to when you apply for residency. But ultimately, by the time you're matching, you must have passed your step one, step two, and ECFMG must have verified that you've graduated from an eligible medical school and have a diploma, which they'll verify. So that's really important because the bulk of the effort will be spent around meeting these two requirements, while at the same time trying to optimize yourself for a successful match. Compared to the US graduates who, they take step one, step two CS and CK, and that's for most medical schools in the US, that's required for them to graduate from the 4-year medical school. So the pathway is already embedded and aligned with the medical school graduation requirements. And so most of them will take step one somewhere between 2nd and 3rd year, CK and CS somewhere between 3rd year and 4th year, or sometimes after 4th year. But this is embedded within their training. So they sort of have an upper hand when it comes to being ready to participate in the match, while ECFMG sponsored IMGs really don't have USMLE incorporated into their medical training. So this often involves people going out of their way, like we're all doing right now, to learn more about the process, figure out if our medical schools are eligible, and then dealing with the administrative processes associated with ECFMG and our medical schools. And the process will be slightly different on the medical school end, depending on your medical school processes. We'll talk about that in a second. So then the match, I think the video summarizes what the match does very well. But after the match, then you get into a residency training program. And depending on which visa type you are going into the into the residency training program, then step 3 becomes either important or not. So usually for people who go into GME training with a type of a visa called H-1B, which is it's a immigrant worker visa, they need to have step 3. They need to have taken and passed step 3. To be eligible for that sponsorship. That tends to be a small group of people. For the rest of people, if you're ECFMG sponsored through a different visa called J1, then you just follow into the pathway of US trainees, which means somewhere during your residency training, you do your USMLE step 3. So this is usually a very low stakes exam. But it's required for you to be licensed by the state medical board of whichever state you're practicing in. So you'll have to do it before you finish residency. And then once you're licensed, you can practice with the medicine in the US in your specialty. That little asterisk it's a little bit nuanced for IMGs about the ability to practice in the US, but generally you will be able to. Let's go to the next one. So just a further explanation of the difference. So ERAS stands for Electronic Residency Application Service. This is something that you will get involved in after when you're starting to apply for residency. So typically after you've already taken your at least step 1 USMLE. And at that point, you will be plugged into ECFMG, and there will be guidance on how to register for ERAS. And this will be handled at a future webinar where we talk about residency application. But just so you know, it's an electronic residency application service. So most programs don't necessarily, anymore, they don't require you to send paper applications to each individual programs. And then NRMP, you've already heard about it. Remember, you have to be ECFMG certified to participate in the residency match. Now, there are programs that do not participate in the NRMP match, but by far those will be in the single-digit percentages. Those programs will not require you to enter into the NRMP database, and you can just apply and accept a match outside of the NRMP match day. Over the years, that number has been decreasing, and I don't have examples top of my head, especially for residency programs. They might be more in the fellowship side of things than in the residency programs. So this is just data to show that the process sounds complex, but the numbers are supportive at the end, in the sense that in 2008, and I mean, there's new data, I just didn't have time to aggregate everything. In 2008, across residency programs in the US, about 1 in 4 of trainees were IMGs. So that's in my opinion, I think that's great. It can be more, and maybe that varies depending on the specialty. For example, in medicine, internal medicine, that might be higher. In plastic surgery or neurosurgery, that might be fewer. And then percentage of IMGs in primary care is 1 in 3. And primary care here is all encompassing. It could range from, primary care in internal medicine, in family medicine, some parts of psychiatry, pediatrics, and women's health. And then a lot of IMGs are engaged in patient care as opposed to non-patient care, which is administrative or research jobs. And there's a decent number of IMGs in academics, which means people who've remained engaged as faculty members in various medical schools. So, you know, to me, these are substantial numbers, and I think it's worth thinking about this when you're starting out. So every year the NRMP releases data on people who applied for match and in relation to the position. So you can see that since 1952, when they've been tracking this data, the number of PGY1 means postgraduate year one, which is basically the first year of residency. The number of positions has increased, but the number of applicants has increased at a faster rate than the position, which does probably indicate that the probability of matching is now in 2020 was probably lower than it was in 1952, but that's probably true of many situations comparing 1950s to the 2000s. This shows the number of foreign trained physicians, which is, it's a category for both US citizens and non-US citizens, anyone who did training outside of the US. And you can see that compared to 2016, 2020, the number is relatively flat, maybe a slight increase, but it's not significant. And as a proportion of the total number of applicants, actually in 2020, it's kind of also relatively the same. I think the number of US citizens who are IMGs has been increasing because of the Caribbean medical schools. And then this graph is just to show you the match rate. So basically, we've looked at the number of positions and number of applicants, but not everyone who participates in the match gets a position. So those who get a position are said to have matched into residency. And you can see that so MD is kind of the typical medical school or allopathic medical school. So those guys have always gotten positions. And it's because, like I explained a few slides back, the general structure of allopathic medical schools in the US has aligned with the pathway for residency. So the system is designed for that. There are few people in the US who go to osteopathic medical schools, and I wouldn't even spend time thinking, highlighting the differences, but it's usually a few of them. They generally didn't have high match rates, but recently, because the US is trying to plug the deficit of US-based physicians, their match rates have increased. US IMGs are kind of in the green. There are reasons why their graph seems to be trending down, but I want to highlight to you the non-US IMGs, which is the, well, I'll call it red, but you know, it's not been the greatest match rate, but the latest match, which is from 2020, that had one of the highest match rate for non-US citizen IMGs at greater than 50%. So, you know, 1 in 2 chance that if you successfully apply, you're going to match. This is a breakdown of the positions offered. I found this slide helpful just to show the audience, like, if you're a numbers guy and you want to play probability, how maybe you can think about where your specialty of interest fits in when it comes to the number of positions offered. So you can see by far internal medicine has the most positions. So they offered 9,000 positions and they filled 8,700. So almost, you know, greater than 80% filling rate. The number of US seniors who filled the medicine position is less than a third. So it tells you that 60% of people who, close to 60% of people who match into internal medicine were not MD seniors from the US. So this is where a lot of IMGs come in. And the graph kind of goes down that way. So you have internal medicine, family medicine, pediatrics, emergency medicine. So a lot of medical specialty. And then you see surgery preliminary, which means it's just the first year of surgical training. It's not full training. Oftentimes, if you do surgery prelim, you have to find another program to do categorical surgery, which is written here, surgery C. And you can see for categorical surgery, there are 1,500 positions, and the filled positions were 1,500. So they don't have many unfilled positions. US seniors were 1,000 out of 1,500. You come down to things like plastic surgery, neurosurgery, and there are 200 positions countrywide. They were all filled, and majority were filled by US. It's worth pointing out that there were about 39 US seniors who went into neurosurgery, which, again, just for illustration purposes, it shows it's not an impossibility. There are people who've trained abroad and have gotten into neurosurgery. The same with radiation oncology, plastic surgery. The numbers are smaller, but it's not impossible. So this data gets released every year in March. So next year, after the March day, which happens to be around the 3rd week of March, there will be a report, and I'll show you the website to get that from. So moving on to ECFMG, if you get a chance, please go through the blog article. It's the most detailed description of what you need to do to register and to do your USMLE as an IMG. I won't go into all those details because we're actually, we're almost running out of time. So a couple of things. I just wanted to highlight a few resources. So ECFMG, the website is ecfmg.org. If you come here, you can just go to About ECFMG, About Programs, and click on Certification. And that will walk you through everything you need to know if you're applying for certification. And then you can go to, this is at a later stage when you've already matched. This is where you put your application. So you can see for graduates, you'll go to the interactive web application, which is where you register. So if you are new to this website, you will come down here and click here to establish an account, okay? And it will walk you through what you need to do. This is the first step in applying for ECFMG registration, which is prerequisite to apply for USMLE. This is that booklet. It's available online, and you can download that again from the ECFMG. If you go to resources, it should be somewhere, actually. Yeah, here. You just click on this, and that's a PDF that will develop everything you need to know. There are 2 more links to check. So nrmp.org, that's where you'll find this result and data for the match. And the other website is called FRIDA. FRIDA, this is the website. So it's basically the database of residency training programs. So this is where you can log in to search for your specialty and see which programs are available. So you can search here and it will tell you the programs, okay? So this we'll put this on the website somewhere for people to refer to. And Nyaki, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Steve. I feel like this presentation was packed with so much high yield stuff. So thank you for putting in the time to put that together. I think one thing we realized about this topic is that it's impossible to fit or condense it into a 1-hour webinar or 1-hour conversation because it's such an important topic. And for us as KEDU, our goal is to provide you with all the resources and get you get all of your questions answered. And it's also a goal to support you in your journey as you're navigating your training and also your practice, whether you're in Kenya or in the diaspora. So we don't want to make sure that the conversation continues beyond the presentation. So our discussion forums are up, and there's a lot of questions in the chat. But one that I wanted to, that keeps coming up for a lot of people, is the question on getting your US clinical experiences. How did you go about doing that? And any advice for someone who's trying to navigate that?
Yeah, so I think the US clinical experience is a great way to boost your application, because it's kind of, and unfortunately the attitude out there is if you're coming from a med school that no one has heard about, they just don't think it's great, which is not true, because there are many successful people, and that's not true. So that's not for you to worry about as an applicant. However, the clinical experience, my opinion is that the best type of clinical experience that tends to carry weight in your CV is if you get an opportunity to do it as a medical student in Kenya and you come to the US for an elective. So typically when external students come to medical schools for electives, they get the privileges of the US medical students, which often involve seeing patients, touching patients, examining them, writing notes, kind of the full experience. And most residency programs will look favorably at that type of experience. Now, not everyone gets those opportunities. And at our next session, we'll highlight how people are able to go about their clinical experience requirements. Others are observerships after you finish med school or even during med school. Typically, observerships is as it says, you're observing, you're not touching or writing. So it's better than nothing, but it's not better than the US-based clinical experience for an elective student. And there are other ways to meet that requirement, but it's highly encouraged. I would say if you can, for those who are in med school, at least I know at the University of Nairobi we're required to do an elective the fourth year, and more university as well. Those could be opportunities where the KEDU network can help people who are looking for electives.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate that answer. I do want to shout out, there's someone called Aaron Mwabi who said that you are his medical officer in Mathare. So he's in the audience today. So thanks for joining us. And we really appreciate the experience that you have, because I feel like you really represent the Kenyan practicing physician making that transition and then practicing in the US. And for a lot of people, I can see a lot of people who are taking notes, who are really just taking in the information that you've shared with us today. So we just want to thank you. So again, in the interest of time, we really respect your time. And I know that we set aside an hour. Do you have any parting words, anything that you want to?
Yeah, there are just a few. I'm looking at the group chat. And I think someone asked about the matching process and high impact factors. I think the video highlighted how the algorithm works, but the high impact factors that will be discussed in the next session where we talk about residency applications. And then opportunities besides clinical practice like healthcare management, public health, and research. I'm really hoping that when we put together a panel of people in future webinars, we will include people who've done these alternative pathways, because in my opinion, I think those are great. And there will be people who are more qualified to talk about them. I know of a lot of people. So, and I'm sure within KEDU there is a lot of people as well. So stay tuned. And then Nidhi asked, my university is not accredited by World Directory of Medical Schools, but it's in the process. Yeah, so there's no way for you to apply for USMLEs until your university is under the directory. And for those who don't know what that means, I'll reference you to the blog article. There's a link on how to find out if your medical school is in the list of the World Directory of Medical Schools. So unfortunately for Nidhi, that has to happen before ECFMG can register you to be able to register for USMLE. So I'm glad it's in the process. Someone talked a few questions about COVID-19 impact on testing. And unfortunately, there's, we've been, me and a group of my friends who are somewhere in the audience, we just can't think about we can't imagine how that's going to have a lot of downstream effects. Specifically, Step 2 CS testing has been postponed for at least 12 to 18 months, and that's across board, both for US and foreign trainees. The problem is it's more likely going to impact foreign trainees because US trainees are able, some medical schools are working with NBME, which is the testing organization, to be able to do some form of CS or CS-like testing in med school. So unfortunately, I don't have solutions or ideas on how to navigate those. Those are just bottleneck for everyone. And then someone asked about, is it easier to, does it get easier if you're a green card holder? I would say it does help because there are certain programs that do not sponsor visas at all. And so if you have a green card, then your pool of programs that you're able to apply into expands. And if your denominator is higher, then your chances of matching are higher, I would think. And there should be data on this in that NRMP report on matching by for IMGs, whether they were US-based, US citizens or green card holders versus non-US based. Someone talked, I think Aisha is given some advice. How do you get letters of recommendation? And that tends to come from the US clinical experience. I think there was a question that I just last on. There are many questions, I can't answer all of them. Someone asked about, can you get into cardiothoracic surgery, urology, or you'll have to do some subspecialty after general surgery? So Yasin, I think, one of the slides I showed was to show the relative numbers of the positions available for matching. For surgical specialty, those tend to be fewer. Now for surgical subspecialty, right off the bat, those are even smaller and some are not even participating in the match. So my guess is that it's not impossible. There are Kenyan physicians who are cardiothoracic surgeons and other African physicians as well. I would suspect that probably the pathway that might have a favorable, not necessarily high, but favorable probability will be general surgery and then subspecialty fellowship in CT surgery. These are things that I think someone can mentor you through. Yeah, I think there's a lot more, but I can't go into it. Encourage people to email or engage with the website.
Thank you so much, Steve. Again, this conversation is continuing. So go to kedusa.org to continue the conversation on our discussion forums. We're looking forward to talking with you. And also, if you've already posted a question on the chat or the discussion forum, we'll take some of those questions and put them in the forum so that people can get questions answered within our community. So please join us. I think that you'll find the community to be a very community. We also encourage you to engage with us on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn, so you can know when our next webinar is going to be. And there's lots of great speakers and great topics that we look forward to bringing to the community. I think someone had also asked, for those who are not familiar with what KEDU is Kenyan Doctors USA, and it's an organization founded by a team of US-based Kenyan physicians that aim to provide an opportunity for connection for Kenyan doctors across in Kenya or also in the diaspora. So for a long time, our wonderful founder, Dr. Christine Garuya, who is an emergency medicine attending at Yale, she felt that people were not talking to each other, and this organization kind of came into the picture as a space for us to start those conversations, and this is what we're doing. This is why we exist, to support you. So thank you again for joining us, and this concludes our webinar, and look forward to more webinars addressing this very same topic and continue the conversation. Thanks, guys.